The stagecoach rattled into Wilcox, Arizona on a blistering August afternoon in 1878, carrying a woman who had buried 3 identities before reaching her 24th year, and Quinton Pierce watched her step down onto the dusty street with the kind of careful grace that suggested she was used to being noticed, but would rather not be. He had been leaning against the post outside the general store, waiting for supplies he had ordered 2 weeks prior, when the coach arrived in a cloud of red dust that seemed to hang in the merciless heat like a curtain. The woman wore a dark traveling dress that must have been suffocating in the Arizona sun, and her face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. But what struck Quinton most was the way she surveyed the town as she descended, her eyes moving quickly, cataloging every building, every person, every possible exit. He recognized that look because he had worn it himself once, years ago, when he had arrived in this same town with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and memories he would have paid good money to forget. The woman paid the driver, declined his offer to help with her single trunk, and then stood there for a moment as the stagecoach rumbled away toward its next destination. She held a small leather satchel close to her body, and Quinton noticed that her knuckles were white where she gripped the handle. Whatever she was running from, it was not far enough behind her yet. He should have minded his own business. He had built his ranch from nothing over the past 8 years, starting with a small parcel of land, and expanding it through hard work and careful management, until he had one of the most productive cattle operations in Cochise County. He had learned to keep to himself, to avoid entanglements, to focus on the work that needed doing from sunup to sundown. The last thing a man in his position needed was to get involved with a woman who clearly came with complications. But there was something about the set of her shoulders, the way she straightened her spine as if preparing for battle, that made him push off from the post and walk toward her. "Afternoon," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Wilcox. You look like you could use some directions." She turned to face him, and he got his first clear look at her eyes. They were the color of river stones, gray-green and clear, and they assessed him with the same quick efficiency she had applied to the town. She was beautiful, he realized, though her face was drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like the bone-deep weariness that came from carrying too many secrets for too long. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was softer than he had expected, with a hint of an accent he could not quite place. Southern, perhaps, but refined, educated. "I am looking for the boarding house. I was told there is one run by a Mrs. Calloway." "There is," Quinton confirmed. "Though I should warn you, Martha Calloway runs a tight ship. She does not take kindly to late rent or unseemly behavior." The corner of the woman's mouth lifted in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I assure you, I have no intention of causing any trouble. I simply need a clean room and a quiet place to rest. It is 2 streets over," he said, pointing. "The white house with the blue shutters. You cannot miss it." She nodded her thanks and bent to lift her trunk, but Quinton was already moving. "Let me help you with that. It is too hot to be hauling luggage across town." For a moment, he thought she would refuse. He could see the instinct to decline written clearly across her face, the automatic rejection of help that came from being on the run. But then she seemed to reconsider, perhaps recognizing that it would draw more attention to argue with a stranger over a trunk than to simply accept assistance. "That is very kind," she said finally. "I appreciate it." Quinton hefted the trunk onto his shoulder. It was heavier than it looked, and he wondered what she had packed inside. Not much in the way of clothing, judging by the weight distribution. Books, perhaps, or something more valuable. They walked in silence for a few moments, their footsteps kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The heat pressed down on them like a physical weight, and Quinton could see the sheen of perspiration on the woman's face despite her obvious attempts to remain composed. "I am Quinton Pierce," he said finally. "I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been here about 8 years now." She glanced at him sideways, and he could see her weighing how much to tell him. "Zara Oakes," she said at last. "I am new to Arizona. I came from back east." It was not the whole truth, but Quinton did not press. He had learned long ago that everyone had their reasons for the things they chose to share and the things they chose to keep hidden. "What brings you to Wilcox?" he asked instead. "We do not get many visitors who stay longer than a night or two. Most folks are just passing through on their way to somewhere else." "I am looking for work," Zara said. "I heard there might be opportunities here for someone with secretarial skills. I can read and write, keep accounts, correspond with business associates." "I worked for a law office in St. Louis for a time." Quinton filed that information away. St. Louis. That was a long way from Arizona, and it explained the refined speech and the educated bearing. But it did not explain why a woman with those kinds of skills would leave a comfortable position in a thriving city to come to a dusty frontier town, where the biggest excitement was usually a dispute over water rights or the occasional conflict with rustlers. They reached Martha Calloway's boarding house, and Quinton set the trunk down on the porch. The door opened before they could knock, and Martha herself appeared, a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that had been honed by 30 years of running a boarding house in various frontier towns. "Afternoon, Quinton," she said, then turned her attention to Zara. "You must be the young lady who sent the telegram inquiring about a room. Miss Oakes, was it?" "Yes, madam," Zara said. "I hope my wire arrived in time to reserve accommodation." "It did," Martha said, "though I must tell you I run a respectable establishment. No men in the rooms, no drinking, and rent is due every Saturday morning. You miss a payment, you find somewhere else to sleep." "Understood." "Perfectly," Zara said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she had heard similar speeches before. Martha nodded approvingly. "Good. Come on in, then. I will show you to your room. Quinton, thank you for helping with the trunk. You are welcome to stay for lemonade if you like. I just made a fresh pitcher." Quinton hesitated. He had already spent more time in town than he had planned, and there was work waiting back at the ranch. But he found himself curious about Zara Oakes and her carefully guarded secrets, and besides, Martha made the best lemonade in Cochise County. "That sounds fine," he said, following them inside. The boarding house was cool and dim after the brightness of the street, and Quinton felt his shoulders relax slightly as he stepped into the familiar parlor. Martha led Zara upstairs to show her the room, and Quinton settled into one of the worn but comfortable chairs to wait. He could hear the murmur of voices from above, Martha explaining the house rules and Zara responding with appropriate questions about meals and laundry. When they came back down, Zara had removed her hat and travel coat, and Quinton could see her more clearly. She had dark hair pinned up in a practical style, and her face, though tired, had a quiet strength to it that he found himself admiring. She was not a woman who would break easily, he thought. Whatever storms she had weathered, they had made her harder but not brittle. Martha brought out the lemonade and some cookies she had baked that morning, and they sat in the parlor making polite conversation. Quinton learned that Zara had no family to speak of, that she had been traveling for nearly 3 weeks to reach Wilcox, and that she was determined to make a fresh start in Arizona. She asked him about the town, about the opportunities for employment, about the kind of people who lived here. "It is a good town," Quinton said honestly. "Folks here mostly keep to themselves, but they will help a neighbor in need. The mining operations bring in enough commerce to keep things stable, and the ranchers do well enough with cattle and horses. There is a school teacher, a doctor, a preacher who comes through once a month. Not much in the way of entertainment, but it is peaceful most of the time. Peaceful sounds perfect, Zara said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made Quinton wonder what kind of chaos she had left behind. He finished his lemonade and stood to leave. I should be getting back to my ranch. But if you need anything, Miss Oakes, or if you are looking for work, you can ask around town. Someone will know where to find me. Thank you, Mr. Pierce, she said, rising as well. You have been very kind. Their eyes met for a moment, and Quinton felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of sorts, as if some part of him understood some part of her without words being necessary. Then he broke the contact, nodded to Martha, and let himself out into the afternoon heat. As he rode back to his ranch, Quinton tried to push thoughts of Zara Oakes from his mind. He had more important things to focus on. His foreman, Daniel Hutchins, had reported problems with one of the water sources, and they needed to ride out to investigate before the herd suffered. There were fences to mend, cattle to brand, and a dozen other tasks that required his attention. A mysterious woman with secrets was the last thing he needed to be thinking about. But that night, lying in his bed and listening to the coyotes call to each other across the desert, he found himself wondering about her anyway. What was she running from? What had happened in St. Louis, or wherever she had really come from, that made her flee to the edge of civilization? And why did he care? He told himself it was simple human curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, in a place he rarely examined too closely, Quinton knew it was more than that. He recognized something in Zara Oakes because it mirrored something in himself. They were both people who had left their pasts behind and come west looking for a second chance. The difference was that he had found his peace 8 years ago, and she was just beginning her search. The next few days passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work. Quinton rode out with Daniel to check on the water situation, and discovered that someone had been tampering with the flow, diverting water that should have been going to his land. It was not the first time such a thing had happened, and it probably would not be the last. Water rights were a constant source of tension in Arizona, where rain was scarce and every drop was precious. Could be the Morrison outfit, Daniel suggested as they examined the makeshift dam that had been built across the creek. They have been expanding their herd and they might be feeling the pinch. Quinton shook his head. John Morrison is not the type to resort to this kind of thing. He would come talk to me directly if he had a problem. This is someone else. Want me to post a watch? Daniel asked. Not yet, Quinton said. Let me talk to the sheriff first. Maybe he has heard something. So 2 days after meeting Zara Oakes, Quinton found himself riding back into Wilcox to speak with Sheriff Tom Brennan. He conducted his business quickly, learning that there had been several reports of water tampering in the area, and that the sheriff suspected a group of newcomers who had been making trouble at the saloon. Then, telling himself it was only polite, Quinton stopped by Martha's boarding house to see how Zara was settling in. Martha answered the door with a knowing look that made Quinton feel uncomfortably transparent. Miss Oakes is in the parlor, she said without preamble. She has been going door to door all over town looking for work, poor thing. Not much call for secretarial skills in Wilcox, I am afraid. Quinton found Zara sitting by the window, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the street with an expression that managed to be both hopeful and resigned at the same time. She looked up when he entered and a genuine smile crossed her face. "Mr. Pierce," she said. "What a pleasant surprise." "I was in town on business," he said, feeling awkward in a way he had not felt in years. "Thought I would stop by and see how you were getting on." "That is very thoughtful," she said. "Please sit down. I was just contemplating my limited options." He settled into the chair across from her. "Martha says you have been looking for work." "Yes," Zara said with a sigh. "Unfortunately, it seems that Wilcox does not have much need for someone with my particular skills. The general store owner suggested I might find work as a laundress or a cook, but I am afraid my domestic abilities are rather limited. I can keep perfect accounts and compose business correspondence in 3 languages, but I can barely boil water without burning it." Quinton found himself smiling despite the obvious disappointment in her voice. "What 3 languages? English, French, and Spanish," she said. "My father believed in thorough education, at least before." She trailed off, and Quinton saw the shutters come down over her eyes again. "Before what?" he asked gently. She met his gaze, and he could see her weighing whether to trust him. "Before he lost everything," she said finally. "My father was a successful merchant in New Orleans. He had a warehouse and a fleet of ships that traded throughout the Gulf. But he made some poor investments, trusted the wrong partners, and when the financial panic hit in '73, we lost it all. He died 2 years later, broken by the shame of it." "I am sorry," Quinton said, and he meant it. "Thank you," Zara said. "After he died, I had to find work to support myself. I had no other family, you see. My mother died when I was young and I was an only child. So I went to St. Louis and found a position with a law firm. The work was good and the pay was adequate. But something happened," Quinton prompted. Zara looked down at her hands. "The senior partner developed an interest in me that went beyond the professional. When I made it clear that his attentions were unwelcome, he became vindictive. He told other firms in the city that I was unreliable, that I had stolen from him. It was not true, but his word carried weight, and suddenly no one would hire me. I realized I needed to go somewhere far away, somewhere I could start over without his reputation following me." Quinton felt anger kindle in his chest at the injustice of it, but he kept his voice calm. "So you came to Arizona." "I came to Arizona," she agreed. "I had heard that frontier towns were more forgiving of the past, that people here cared more about what you could do than where you came from. But I am beginning to think I may have been overly optimistic." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Quinton heard himself say, "I could use someone with your skills at the ranch." Zara looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that running a cattle operation involves more than just working with animals," he said, thinking as he spoke. "There are accounts to keep, correspondence with buyers in California and back east, contracts to negotiate, supply orders to place. I have been managing it all myself, but frankly, my handwriting is terrible and my spelling is worse. If you are as good with numbers and letters as you say you are, you could be a real help." "Mr. Pierce, I cannot possibly, the pay would be fair," he continued, warming to the idea now that he had voiced it. "Room and board included. I have a small cabin on the property that was built for a foreman, but Daniel prefers to live in town, so it sits empty. You would have your own space, complete privacy. The work would not be hard, just detailed. And when you were not working on ranch business, your time would be your own." Zara stared at him as if trying to determine whether he was serious. "Why would you offer me this? You barely know me." "Because I know what it is like to need a second chance," Quinton said simply. "And because everyone deserves the opportunity to build something new without being haunted by yesterday." Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them back quickly. "That is very generous," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But people will talk. A single woman living at her ranch with a bachelor owner. It would not look proper." "Martha could come out once a week to check on things," Quinton suggested. "Act as a chaperone of sorts, and Daniel is there most days. Besides, my ranch hands are all married men who live in town with their families." It is not like you would be isolated with just me. There are people around regularly." Zara considered this, and Quinton could see her turning the offer over in her mind, examining it from every angle. "I would want to earn my keep," she said finally, "not be a charity case." "You would be earning it," he assured her. "Trust me, the bookkeeping alone will keep you busy." She took a deep breath and then nodded. "All right. Yes, I accept your offer, Mr. Pierce, and thank you, truly." "Quinton," he said. "If we are going to be working together, you should call me Quinton." "Zara," she replied, extending her hand. He took it, and the contact sent an unexpected warmth through his arm. Her hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. They shook once, formally, and then released, but Quinton felt the impression of her touch long after she had pulled away. They made arrangements for her to move to the ranch the following day. Quinton would bring a wagon and collect her trunk and whatever other possessions she had acquired. Martha, when informed of the arrangement, gave Quinton a long, searching look but ultimately nodded her approval. "You are a good man, Quinton Pierce," she said. "But you mind yourself. That girl has been hurt and she does not need anyone making her life more complicated." "I know," Quinton said. "I just want to help." Martha said, in a tone that suggested she had heard that before and remained skeptical. But the next day, when Quinton arrived with the wagon, Zara was ready and waiting. She had even fewer possessions than he had expected. Just the trunk, the satchel she had carried from the stagecoach, and a carpet bag that looked as though it had seen better days. She wore a simple cotton dress more suitable to the Arizona heat, and she had a determined set to her jaw that suggested she was ready to prove herself. The ride out to the ranch took about an hour, and they talked easily during the journey. Quinton pointed out landmarks, told her about the history of the area, explained how he had built his operation from the ground up. Zara listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that showed she was already thinking about how to organize the information. "So you have contracts with buyers in San Francisco and in Kansas City," she said, "and you ship cattle by rail from Tucson." "That is right," Quinton confirmed. "The railroad came through in 1880, which made everything easier. Before that, we had to drive the cattle all the way to California, which took months and lost a lot of weight from the animals." "I assume you have copies of all the contracts," Quinton winced. "I have the actual contracts." "As for copies, well, I have been meaning to make some, but I never seem to find the time." Zara gave him a look that was equal parts exasperation and amusement. "So if something happened to the originals, you would have no record of the terms?" "I suppose not," he admitted. "That is the first thing we are going to fix," she said firmly. "A business of this size needs proper documentation." "Yes, madam," Quinton said, and found himself grinning at her bossy tone. When they arrived at the ranch, Zara fell silent, taking in the sprawling property with wide eyes. The main house was not large, but it was well built and well maintained, constructed of adobe with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There were several outbuildings, a barn that could house 20 horses, corrals for the cattle, and about 100 yards from the main house, a smaller cabin that would be Zara's new home. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "I have never seen anything like it." "It is home," Quinton said simply. "Come on, I will show you the cabin first." The cabin was small but comfortable, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, a separate bedroom, and even a small attached room with a copper bathtub that Quinton had installed 2 years prior, when he thought his sister might come visit. She never had, having decided that frontier life was not for her, but at least now the amenity would be put to good use. "This is perfect," Zara said, running her hand along the rough wooden table that dominated the main room. "More than I expected, honestly." I will have Daniel bring in some supplies later today, Quinton said. Food staples, firewood, that sort of thing. And if you need anything else, just let me know. The main house has an office where we can work on the accounts and correspondence. I figured we would spend a few hours each day going through everything, and then you would be free to do as you like. That sounds very reasonable, Zara said. When would you like to start? Tomorrow morning, Quinton suggested. That will give you the rest of today to settle in and get your bearings. Tomorrow morning it is then, she agreed. Quinton left her to unpack and return to the main house, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. He had acted on impulse in offering Zara the job, but now that she was here, he found himself hoping he had not made a mistake. Not in terms of her abilities, he had no doubt she would prove more than capable, but in terms of what her presence might stir up inside him. He had been alone for a long time, had told himself he preferred it that way. But now, with Zara Oakes settling into his property, he was not so sure anymore. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red across the desert sky, Quinton sat on his porch and watched smoke rise from the chimney of the cabin. Zara was making a fire, probably to cook her supper. He wondered if she felt lonely out here after the bustle of city life, or if she found the quiet as soothing as he did. The next morning, Zara appeared at the main house just after dawn, looking crisp and professional despite the early hour. Quinton had coffee brewing and biscuits warming in the oven, and they shared a simple breakfast before getting down to work. "Show me everything," Zara said, pulling out a notebook and pencil from her satchel. "I need to understand the full scope of the operation before I can organize anything properly." For the next several hours, Quinton laid out the entire structure of his ranching business. He showed her the ledgers where he had been tracking income and expenses, the contracts with various buyers, the correspondence with feed suppliers and equipment dealers, the records of cattle births and deaths and sales. It was all there more or less, but it was disorganized and incomplete, and Zara's expression grew increasingly dismayed as she sorted through the papers. "Quinton," she said finally, "I do not mean to criticize, but this is chaos. You have records scattered across 3 different ledgers. Some contracts are dated and some are not, and I cannot find any systematic accounting of your annual revenue anywhere." "I told you my bookkeeping was not the best," he said defensively. "Not the best," she repeated. She stopped herself, took a breath and tried again. "This is a perfect example of why you need professional help. You have built an impressive operation here, but you are losing money through disorganization alone. I guarantee it. So can you fix it?" he asked. Zara looked at the papers spread across his desk, then back at him, and a fierce determination lit her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I can fix it. But it is going to take time, and I am going to need you to be patient with me while I sort through this mess and put together a proper system." "Take all the time you need," Quinton said. Over the following weeks, Zara transformed Quinton's office from a cluttered, disorganized space into a model of efficiency. She created a new filing system, transcribed all the important documents into clean copies, organized the ledgers chronologically and by category, and even discovered several billing errors that had resulted in Quinton underpaying himself for cattle he had sold months earlier. "You left nearly $300 on the table with the Kansas City buyer alone," she informed him one afternoon, waving a corrected invoice. "I am drafting a letter explaining the discrepancy and requesting payment of the balance owed." Quinton, who had been reviewing a report on the fall calf crop, looked up in surprise. $300. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure," she said. "Look here at the contracted price per head versus what they actually paid you." They either made an honest mistake or they were hoping you would not notice the difference. Either way, you are entitled to that money. Zara, you are worth your weight in gold, Quinton said with genuine admiration. She flushed with pleasure at the compliment. I am only doing what you hired me to do. But it was more than that, and they both knew it. Zara was not just fixing his bookkeeping, she was teaching him how to be a better businessman. She explained concepts like profit margins and cash flow, showed him how to forecast expenses and plan for lean seasons, helped him understand the importance of maintaining detailed records for tax purposes. And as they worked together, day after day, something else began to develop between them. It started with small things. The way Quinton made sure to have fresh coffee ready when Zara arrived each morning. The way Zara learned to read his moods and know when he needed quiet focus versus animated discussion. They fell into an easy rhythm, a partnership that felt natural and right in a way Quinton had not expected. He found himself looking forward to their morning work sessions, not just because of the progress they were making on the accounts, but because he enjoyed her company. Zara was intelligent and funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She was also hardworking and determined, never complaining about the tedious nature of the tasks she undertook. For her part, Zara seemed to be settling into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She took to riding, borrowing one of Quinton's gentler horses and exploring the property in the late afternoons when the work was done. She made friends with Daniel and his wife, Emma, who lived in town and sometimes visited the ranch for Sunday dinners that became a regular occurrence. She even learned to cook, after a fashion, though she cheerfully admitted she would never match Martha's skills in the kitchen. But despite the growing closeness between them, Quinton was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. He remembered Martha's warning, and he was conscious of the fact that Zara was in his employ and dependent on him for her livelihood. The last thing he wanted was to make her uncomfortable or put her in a position where she felt obligated to reciprocate feelings she might not share. Still, there were moments when he caught himself watching her as she worked, noting the way the afternoon light caught in her dark hair, or the small furrow of concentration that appeared between her brows when she was puzzling through a particularly complex calculation. There were moments when their hands would brush as they reached for the same document, and he would feel that same electric warmth he had felt the first time they shook hands in Martha's parlor. He told himself it was nothing, that it would pass, that he was simply unused to having a woman around after years of solitary living. But deep down, he knew better. He was falling for Zara Oakes, with her mysterious past and her determined spirit and her river-stone eyes that seemed to see right through him. The question was, what, if anything, was he going to do about it? The answer came in late October, when trouble arrived at the ranch in the form of 3 men on horseback. Quinton was out checking the fences in the north pasture when he heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. He turned to see his ranch hand, Miguel Rodriguez, riding toward him at a gallop, his face flushed with urgency. "Boss, you need to come quick," Miguel called as he reined in his horse. "There are men at the house asking for Miss Oakes, and they do not look friendly." Quinton felt his blood run cold. "What kind of men?" "City men," Miguel said. "Wearing suits and carrying guns. Daniel is keeping them on the porch, but they are getting impatient." Quinton did not wait to hear more. He spurred his horse into a run, racing back toward the main house with Miguel close behind. As they approached, he could see what Miguel meant. 3 men stood on his porch, and they did indeed look out of place in their Eastern-style clothing. 2 of them were clearly hired muscle, big men with hard faces and the kind of casual violence in their postures that came from experience. The 3rd man was older, perhaps in his 50s, with silver hair and an expensive suit that probably cost more than Quinton's best horse. Daniel stood between them and the door to the house, his hand resting on the gun at his hip, his face set in grim lines. Quinton dismounted and strode up to the porch. "Gentlemen, this is private property. State your business." The silver-haired man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Pierce, I presume?" "My name is Lawrence Thornton. I am an attorney from St. Louis, and I am here on behalf of my client, Mr. Edmund Ashworth, to speak with a Miss Zara Oakes. I have been informed she is residing on your property." Quinton felt ice settle in his stomach. This was the man from St. Louis, the senior partner who had ruined Zara's reputation and driven her west. He had somehow tracked her here, and now he stood on Quinton's porch demanding to see her. "Miss Oakes is in my employ," Quinton said carefully. "What business do you have with her?" "That is a private matter," Thornton said, "between my client and Miss Oakes. Now, if you would be so kind as to fetch her, we can conclude our business and be on our way." "I do not think so," Quinton said. "You are not welcome here, Mr. Thornton. I suggest you get back on your horses and ride back to wherever you came from." Thornton's expression hardened. "I am afraid I cannot do that. Miss Oakes has something that belongs to Mr. Ashworth, and he wants it back. Now we can handle this civilly, or we can involve the local authorities. The choice is yours." "What could she possibly have that belongs to your client?" Quinton demanded. "Documents," Thornton said. "Sensitive documents that Miss Oakes removed from Mr. Ashworth's office before she fled St. Louis. Documents that could prove very embarrassing to a man of my client's standing if they were to become public." So that was it. Zara had not just run from unwanted attention. She had taken evidence of something, probably proof of Ashworth's corruption or illegal dealings. And now the man wanted it back badly enough to send lawyers and hired guns across half the country to retrieve it. "Even if that were true," Quinton said, "and I am not saying it is, that sounds like a matter for the police, not a private attorney and his muscle." "The police have no jurisdiction in this matter," Thornton said smoothly. "This is a civil dispute, nothing more. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do we need to take a harder approach?" One of the hired men moved his hand toward his gun, a subtle threat that was nonetheless unmistakable. "You pull that weapon, and you will find yourself facing a lot more than one rancher," Daniel said quietly. "We take care of our own out here." Indeed, Quinton could see that Miguel had been joined by 2 other ranch hands, and all of them were armed. The odds had shifted decidedly in Quinton's favor, and Thornton seemed to recognize it. "There is no need for violence," he said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. Mr. Pierce, I am prepared to offer you compensation for your trouble. $500 if you simply convince Miss Oakes to return the documents. You would not even need to be involved beyond that." "I am not interested in your money," Quinton said flatly. "And Miss Oakes is under my protection. You want to speak to her, you go through the proper legal channels. Until then, you are trespassing, and I am within my rights to remove you from my property by force if necessary." Thornton stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. We will do this the official way. But I warn you, Mr. Pierce, you are making a mistake by sheltering this woman. She is a thief and a liar, and when the truth comes out, you will regret ever offering her assistance." "I will take my chances," Quinton said. Thornton gestured to his men, and they mounted their horses. Before leaving, he looked back at Quinton. "We will be in town for the next few days, staying at the hotel. If Miss Oakes changes her mind and decides to do the right thing, she knows where to find us." They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in their wake. Quinton waited until they were out of sight before turning to Daniel. "Send someone to town to fetch the sheriff," he said. I want Tom Brennan to know what just happened here, and double the watch on the property for the next few nights. I do not trust those men to stay away." "You got it, boss," Daniel said, then added quietly, "You think Miss Oakes really took documents from that lawyer?" "I do not know," Quinton said honestly, "but I intend to find out." He found Zara in the cabin, standing at the window and staring out in the direction Thornton and his men had ridden. She turned when Quinton entered, and he could see the fear in her eyes, though she was trying hard to hide it. "You heard?" he asked. "I saw them arrive from the window," she said. "I recognized Mr. Thornton immediately. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me, but I had hoped I would have longer." "Zara, I need you to tell me the truth," Quinton said, moving to stand in front of her. "Did you take documents from Ashworth's office?" She met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I did." "What kind of documents?" Zara took a breath. "Evidence of fraud and bribery. Mr. Ashworth was involved in several illegal schemes, including bribing judges to rule in favor of his clients and fabricating evidence in civil cases. When he made his inappropriate advances and I rejected him, he threatened to destroy my reputation unless I kept quiet about what I had seen. I realized that if I stayed in St. Louis, he would either ruin me or force me into a position where I had no choice but to comply with his demands. So I took the documents, copies of ledgers, correspondence, records of payments, and I left." "Why did you not go to the authorities?" Quinton asked. "Because Ashworth has half the police force in his pocket," Zara said bitterly. "He is a powerful man with powerful friends. If I had tried to expose him in St. Louis, I would have ended up in jail on false charges or worse. I thought if I came out here, far away from his influence, I might be safe. I was wrong." Quinton considered this. "Do you still have the documents?" Zara hesitated, then nodded. "They are hidden. I did not want to leave them somewhere they could be found and used against me." "Where? Do you trust me?" she asked instead of answering. "I do," Quinton said without hesitation. "Otherwise I would not have offered you a place here." "Then please trust me when I say the documents are safe, and they will remain hidden unless I have no other choice but to use them," Zara said. "I do not want to bring trouble to you, Quinton. If Thornton and his men become too much of a problem, I will leave. I can disappear again. I have done it before." "You are not going anywhere," Quinton said firmly. "We all have yesterday, Zara. Things we regret, things we wish we could change. But what matters is building tomorrow. You came here for a fresh start, and I am not going to let some corrupt lawyer from back east take that away from you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" "Because I am falling in love with you," Quinton thought, but he could not say that. Not now, not when she was vulnerable and afraid. So instead, he said, "Because it is the right thing to do, and because you deserve better than to spend the rest of your life running." Zara wiped at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for your kindness." "You do not owe me anything," Quinton said, "but I do need you to promise me something." "What?" "If those men come back, if they try to threaten you or hurt you, you come to me immediately. Do not try to handle this alone." "Understood." "Understood," Zara said. Over the next few days, tension hung over the ranch like a storm cloud. Sheriff Brennan came out to hear the full story, and he promised to keep an eye on Thornton and his men while they remained in Wilcox. But as he pointed out, there was not much he could do unless they actually broke the law. As long as they stayed in town and did not trespass on Quinton's property again, they were within their rights to be in Arizona. "My advice is to hire a lawyer of your own," Brennan said. "If Thornton tries to press charges or file some kind of legal complaint, you will want someone who can fight back." Quinton took the advice and sent a telegram to an attorney he knew in Tucson, a man named Samuel Garrett, who had helped him with property disputes in the past. Garrett replied that he would look into the matter and would come to Wilcox within the week to discuss strategy. In the meantime, life on the ranch continued, though with added security measures. Quinton made sure someone was always watching the cabin where Zara stayed, and he instructed all his ranch hands to be alert for any suspicious activity. Daniel took to sleeping in the barn some nights, just to be on the safe side. Zara, for her part, tried to carry on with her work as if nothing had changed, but Quinton could see the strain in her face. She started at sudden noises, and she kept glancing out the window as if expecting to see Thornton and his men riding up at any moment. One evening, about a week after the confrontation, Quinton knocked on the door of the cabin and found Zara sitting at the table, staring at a cup of untouched tea. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded, and he entered, taking the chair across from her. "You have not been sleeping," he observed. "I can see it in your eyes." "I am afraid," she admitted. "Every night I lie awake wondering if this is the night they will come back, wondering if I made a terrible mistake by staying here instead of running again." "You did not make a mistake," Quinton said gently. "Running would not solve anything. They found you once, they would find you again. At least here you have people willing to stand with you." "I keep thinking about what would happen if this goes to court," Zara said. "Thornton has resources and connections. What do I have?" "Stolen documents and a reputation he has already destroyed. No judge is going to believe me over him." "That is not necessarily true," Quinton said. "Samuel Garrett is a good attorney, and he has experience dealing with corrupt officials. If your documents are as damning as you say they are, they might be enough to turn the tables. Or they might be enough to get me thrown in jail for theft," Zara countered. "Not if we handle this right," Quinton said. He reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture feeling both natural and momentous. "Zara, I know you are scared, but you are not alone in this. I am with you, Daniel and Emma are with you, even Martha Calloway is on your side. Thornton might have money and power back in St. Louis, but out here, that does not mean as much. Out here, what matters is whether people believe you are good and decent, and everyone who has met you can see that you are." Zara looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "Why do you have such faith in me?" "Because I know what it is like to carry the weight of the past," Quinton said. "I have not talked about this much, but I was not always a rancher. Before I came to Arizona, I was a soldier. I fought in the Indian Wars, and I saw things, did things, that I am not proud of. When my enlistment ended, I could not go back to my family in Virginia. I felt like I had too much blood on my hands. So I came west, bought a piece of land with my Army pay, and built something new. This ranch, this life, it is my second chance. And I recognize that same need in you, that same determination to be better than your circumstances tried to make you." Zara's fingers tightened around his. "I had no idea." "Not many people do," Quinton said. "I do not talk about it because it is in the past, and I cannot change it. But what I learned from that experience is that yesterday does not have to define tomorrow. We get to choose who we want to be every single day. And I choose to be someone who stands up for people who deserve better than what life has dealt them." They sat in silence for a moment, hands still clasped across the table, and Quinton felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had been growing since the day she arrived. He wanted to tell her how he felt, wanted to pull her into his arms and promise that everything would be all right, but he held back. There would be time for that later, once this threat had been dealt with and she was truly free. "Thank you, Quinton," Zara said finally, "for everything. I do not think I have properly expressed how much your support means to me." "You do not need to thank me," he said. "Just trust me and let me help you through this." "I do trust you," she said, More than I have trusted anyone in a very long time." The next day, Samuel Garrett arrived from Tucson. He was a lean, sharp-eyed man in his 40s who listened carefully as Quinton and Zara explained the situation. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "This is a complex situation," he said finally. "On the one hand, Miss Oakes did technically commit theft by removing documents from her employer's office. On the other hand, if those documents contain evidence of crimes committed by Mr. Ashworth, she could argue that she was acting as a whistleblower, and that the documents are therefore protected. The question is whether we can prove the validity of the documents and establish a clear pattern of criminal behavior on Ashworth's part." "Can we?" Quinton asked. "Possibly," Garrett said. "I would need to examine the documents in question and potentially conduct some investigation in St. Louis to corroborate the information they contain. That would take time and money, but it could be done." "What about Thornton?" Zara asked. "He is still in town, and I do not believe he is going to simply give up and go home." "No, he will not," Garrett agreed. "My guess is he is waiting to see if you will crack under pressure and voluntarily surrender the documents. When that does not happen, he will likely try to force your hand by filing a lawsuit or pressing criminal charges. We need to be prepared for that." "What do we need to do?" Quinton asked. "First, I need to see the documents," Garrett said, looking at Zara. "I cannot build a defense strategy without knowing exactly what we are working with." Zara glanced at Quinton, who nodded encouragingly. "All right," she said. "They are hidden in a safe place. I can retrieve them this afternoon." "Good," Garrett said. "Second, I am going to file a preemptive complaint with the territorial authorities in Phoenix. If we can get ahead of this and make our case first, it will be much harder for Thornton to paint Miss Oakes as the villain. Third, I suggest you both prepare yourselves for this to become public knowledge. If this goes to trial, there will be newspaper coverage, and people will talk." "Let them talk," Quinton said. "Anyone who knows Zara will believe her over some city lawyer with an axe to grind." Garrett smiled slightly. "I hope you are right, Mr. Pierce. Now, if Miss Oakes would retrieve those documents, we can get started on building our case." Zara left to fetch the documents from their hiding place, which turned out to be a waterproof pouch buried beneath the floorboards of the cabin. She had chosen well. The documents were in perfect condition, despite being hidden for weeks. She handed them to Garrett, who spent the next several hours poring over them with an increasingly grim expression. "This is worse than I expected," he said finally. "Miss Oakes, you have documented evidence here of systematic corruption involving not just Mr. Ashworth, but at least a dozen other prominent citizens of St. Louis, including 2 judges, a police captain, and several city councilmen. If this information were to become public, it would cause a massive scandal. That is why Ashworth wants it back so badly," Zara said. "He knows these documents could destroy him." "They could destroy a lot of people," Garrett agreed, "which means those people are all motivated to keep this quiet. We need to be very careful about how we proceed." "What do you recommend?" Quinton asked. Garrett thought for a moment. "I think our best strategy is to go on the offensive. Rather than waiting for Thornton to make his move, we present this evidence to the territorial authorities and to the federal marshals. Corruption on this scale crosses state lines and involves federal officials, which means it falls under federal jurisdiction. If we can get the marshals interested, they can investigate and potentially file charges. That would neutralize Thornton's threat because Ashworth would be too busy defending himself to go after Miss Oakes." "Will the marshals actually investigate?" Zara asked skeptically. "Or will they dismiss this as a personal dispute? That depends on how we present it," Garrett said. "But I have contacts in the Marshal Service, and I believe I can make a compelling case. It will take some time, but I am confident we can make this work." Over the next few weeks, Garrett worked tirelessly on Zara's behalf. He traveled to Phoenix to meet with territorial officials, sent telegrams to contacts in Washington, and even hired a private investigator to gather additional evidence in St. Louis. Meanwhile, Thornton and his men remained in Wilcox, a constant, menacing presence that kept everyone on edge. There were a few tense encounters. One afternoon, Quinton was in town purchasing supplies when he ran into Thornton outside the general store. The lawyer gave him a cold smile. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "still harboring that little thief, I see." "Miss Oakes is not a thief," Quinton said evenly. "She is a woman of integrity who refused to be intimidated by a corrupt man." "Is that what she told you?" Thornton laughed. "You poor fool. She has you completely snowed." "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? Zara Oakes is a con artist, a liar, and a manipulator. She has been playing you from the start." "I do not believe that for a second," Quinton said. "Of course you do not," Thornton said. "Men like you never do. You think you are rescuing some damsel in distress, when in reality she is using you for protection and resources. Once she has what she needs, she will disappear, and you will be left looking like a fool." "Is that all you have?" Quinton asked. "Baseless accusations and attempts to sow doubt. If you had any real evidence against Zara, you would have presented it by now. The fact that you are resorting to these tactics tells me you are desperate." Thornton's expression hardened. "Enjoy your moral superiority while it lasts, Mr. Pierce. When this is over and Miss Oakes is in custody, we will see how righteous you feel." He walked away, and Quinton stood there for a moment, anger and frustration churning in his gut. But beneath those emotions was absolute certainty. He did not believe Thornton's lies for a second. He knew Zara had worked beside her for months now, had seen her dedication and her integrity. Whatever else might be uncertain, his faith in her was not. That evening he told Zara about the encounter. She listened quietly, her face pale but composed. "He is trying to drive a wedge between us," she said. "Make you doubt me so that you will withdraw your support." "It will not work," Quinton said. "I know who you are, Zara. I know what you are capable of, and none of it matches what Thornton is claiming." "How can you be so sure?" she asked. "You have known me for only a few months. What if he is right? What if I am using you?" Quinton moved to stand in front of her, looking down into her uncertain eyes. "Then I am the happiest fool in Arizona," he said. "Because these past few months, working with you, getting to know you, have been the best months I have had in years. If that is you using me, then I hope you never stop." Zara's breath caught, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, moving slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, Quinton cupped her face in his hands and leaned down to kiss her. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when Zara responded, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, it deepened into something more. All the tension and fear and longing of the past weeks poured into that kiss, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that since the day you arrived," Quinton admitted. "Why did you wait so long?" Zara asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Because I wanted you to be free first," he said. "Free from fear, free from the past. I did not want you to feel obligated or pressured." "I do not feel obligated," Zara said softly. "I feel lucky. Lucky that I stumbled into your town. Lucky that you offered me a chance. Lucky that you saw something in me worth protecting. I am falling in love with you, Quinton Pierce, and it terrifies me because I am afraid something will happen to take this away." "Nothing is going to take this away," Quinton promised. "We are going to fight Thornton and Ashworth, and we are going to win. And then we are going to build a life together if that is what you want." "It is what I want," Zara said, "more than anything." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was a promise, a commitment, a claiming of each other that felt as inevitable as the sunrise. The breakthrough in the case came in late November, when Samuel Garrett returned from Phoenix with a federal marshal in tow. Marshal Frank Donovan was a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, and he listened intently as Garrett presented Zara's evidence and explained the scope of the corruption they had uncovered. "This is substantial," Donovan said when they finished. "If even half of what these documents suggest is true, we are looking at one of the biggest corruption scandals in recent memory. I will need to take this to my superiors in Washington, but I think we have enough here to launch a full investigation." "What about Miss Oakes?" Quinton asked. "What protection can you offer her?" "I can offer her immunity from prosecution in exchange for her testimony," Donovan said. "And I can make it clear to Mr. Thornton and his client that any further harassment of Miss Oakes will be considered obstruction of a federal investigation." "That should be enough to get them to back off. When will you know for sure?" Zara asked. "Give me 2 weeks," Donovan said. "I will telegraph Washington and get authorization to proceed. In the meantime, I suggest you all keep a low profile and avoid any direct confrontations." Those 2 weeks felt like the longest of Quinton's life. But finally, in mid-December, Donovan returned with good news. The federal government was authorizing a full investigation into corruption in St. Louis, and Zara had been granted full immunity. Arrest warrants had been issued for Edmund Ashworth and several of his associates, and federal marshals were on their way to Missouri to execute them. "It is over," Donovan told them. "You are free, Miss Oakes. And Mr. Thornton has been instructed to leave Arizona immediately and cease all contact with you. If he violates that order, he will be arrested for obstruction." Zara sagged with relief, and Quinton caught her, holding her upright. "Thank you," she said to Donovan. "Thank you so much." "Thanks Samuel Garrett," Donovan said. "He is the one who put this case together. I just carried it over the finish line." After Donovan and Garrett left, Quinton and Zara stood alone in the office, looking at each other with something like wonder. "It is really over," Zara said. "I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Quinton said. "You are safe now. You can stay in Arizona or you can go anywhere you want. You are free." "I want to stay here," Zara said immediately. "With you if you will have me." "If I will have you," Quinton repeated, then laughed. "Zara, I have been half in love with you since the day I met you, and completely in love with you for weeks now. There is nothing I want more than for you to stay." "Then I am staying," she said, and kissed him to seal the promise. The news of the corruption scandal broke in the Eastern newspapers just before Christmas, and it was every bit as explosive as Donovan had predicted. Edmund Ashworth and 7 others were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and corruption. The scandal touched off investigations in several other cities, and reformers hailed it as a major victory against the kind of political corruption that had plagued America since the Civil War. In Wilcox, life gradually returned to normal. Zara continued to work as Quinton's secretary and bookkeeper, but now there was no need to hide or to watch over their shoulders. She threw herself into the work with renewed energy, and by the new year, Quinton's ranch was operating with a level of efficiency and profitability it had never achieved before. But more than that, Quinton and Zara built a life together. They took long rides across the desert in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. They had dinners with Daniel and Emma, who became close friends. They attended church services and community gatherings, and Zara gradually became a familiar and beloved figure in Wilcox. In March of 1879, on a warm spring evening with wildflowers blooming across the desert, Quinton asked Zara to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set, when he pulled a simple gold ring from his pocket and held it out to her. "I know we have not been together long," he said, "and I know you have been through a lot, but I love you, Zara Oakes, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Zara looked at the ring, then at Quinton's face, and her eyes filled with happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in April, in a simple ceremony at the church in Wilcox, with Martha Calloway and Emma serving as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Sheriff Brennan gave Zara away, and Samuel Garrett traveled from Tucson to attend. It was a joyful occasion, full of laughter and love, and when Quinton kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They honeymooned at the ranch, which was exactly what they both wanted. For a week, they left the running of the operation to Daniel and the other hands, and they spent their days exploring the land that would be their home, making plans for the future, and simply enjoying each other's company. "I never thought I would find this," Zara said one evening as they sat together watching the stars emerge. "Peace, happiness, love. After everything that happened, I had resigned myself to a life of running and hiding. You gave me so much more than a job or a place to stay, Quinton. You gave me a future." "We gave each other a future," Quinton corrected. "You changed my life just as much as I changed yours. Before you arrived, I was just going through the motions, working to work, existing but not really living. You made me remember what it felt like to have something to look forward to each day." "We all have yesterday," Zara quoted softly. "Let's build tomorrow." "Exactly," Quinton said and pulled her close. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Zara's organizational skills and business acumen complementing Quinton's knowledge of cattle and land management. They expanded the operation, bought additional property, and became one of the most successful ranching families in southern Arizona. In the fall of 1880, Zara gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Marcus. He had his mother's gray-green eyes and his father's stubborn determination, and from the moment he entered the world, he wrapped both parents completely around his tiny fingers. "He is perfect," Quinton said, cradling his son for the first time with a mixture of awe and terror. "Absolutely perfect." "He is ours," Zara said, smiling up at them both from the bed. "The first of many, I hope." "As many as you want," Quinton promised. Marcus was followed 2 years later by a daughter named Sarah, and then by another son, James, in 1884. The house that had once seemed too large for one lonely rancher was suddenly filled with the noise and chaos and joy of family life. Children ran through the halls, laughter echoed from the kitchen, and every day brought new adventures and challenges. Zara proved to be a loving and dedicated mother, though she continued to help manage the ranch business, working from home and teaching the children to read and write and do mathematics. Quinton was a devoted father who spent every spare moment with his children, teaching them to ride and to care for the animals and to respect the land that sustained them. They were not without their difficulties. There were droughts and hard winters, cattle diseases and conflicts with neighbors over water rights. There were the normal challenges of raising children, the scraped knees and childhood illnesses, and occasional disciplinary problems. But through it all, Quinton and Zara faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1889, when Marcus was 8, Sarah was 7, and James was 5, the family gathered on the porch after supper to watch the sunset. It had become a tradition, this evening ritual, a time to slow down and appreciate the beauty of the land they called home. "Tell us the story again," Sarah begged, climbing into her mother's lap. "About how you and Papa met." Zara smiled and glanced at Quinton, who was holding James while Marcus leaned against his side. "Well," she said, "it was a very hot day in August, and I had just arrived in Wilcox on the stagecoach. I was scared and alone, and I did not know where to go or what to do. And then I saw your father standing by the general store, and he looked so steady and calm, like an anchor in a storm. He helped me with my trunk, and he took me to Mrs. Calloway's boarding house, and from that very first day he made me feel safe." "And then you came to work at the ranch," Marcus prompted, having heard this story many times before. "That's right," Quinton continued. "Your mother was the smartest person I had ever met, and she helped me turn this ranch into something really special. But more than that, she helped me remember what it meant to have hope for the future." "What does that mean?" James asked. "It means that sometimes we have sad or difficult things in our past," Zara explained gently. "Things that hurt us or make us feel like we cannot be happy again. But the past does not have to control us. We can choose to let go of yesterday and build a better tomorrow." "Is that what you did?" Sarah asked. "That is exactly what we did," Quinton said. "We all have yesterday, but we chose to build tomorrow together. And you built us." James said delightedly. Everyone laughed, and Quinton felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost hurt. This life, this family, this moment of perfect contentment, it was everything he had never dared to hope for. All because a woman with river stone eyes had stepped off a stagecoach on a hot August day and given him a reason to believe in second chances. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Quinton reached over and took Zara's hand. She squeezed back, and they shared a smile that held 11 years of history, love, and promise. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you too," she replied. "Always." The children chattered on about their day, making plans for the next adventure, and Quinton knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. They had built something strong and true, a foundation that could weather any storm. The ranch continued to thrive over the following years. As the children grew older, they each took on more responsibilities, learning the business from the ground up just as Quinton had done. Marcus showed a talent for working with the cattle and managing the ranch hands. Sarah inherited her mother's head for numbers and began helping with the accounts as soon as she was old enough. James, the youngest, proved to have a gift for horses, training them with a patience and skill that amazed everyone. In 1892, Daniel Hutchins decided to retire from his position as foreman, and Quinton promoted Marcus, who was now 12 and already more capable than many grown men. It was a big responsibility, but Marcus rose to the challenge, and Quinton felt a deep pride watching his son take on leadership of the operation that would one day be his. Zara, meanwhile, became increasingly involved in community affairs. She helped establish a proper school in Wilcox, donating funds and serving on the board of directors. She organized charity drives to help families affected by drought or other hardships. She even gave lectures at the school on bookkeeping and business management, inspiring a new generation of young women to pursue education and economic independence. "You have become quite the pillar of the community," Quinton teased one evening as they prepared for yet another social function. "Someone has to do it," Zara replied with a smile. "Besides, I remember what it felt like to have nowhere to turn, no one to help. If I can make things easier for others, then I am going to do it." "That is one of the things I love most about you," Quinton said, pulling her into his arms. "Your generous heart. And I love your steadiness," Zara said, leaning into his embrace. The way you make everyone around you feel safe and valued. You saved me, Quinton, in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, he corrected, as he always did. We built this life together, and it is better than anything I could have created alone. They kissed, and even after all these years, Quinton still felt that same spark, that same sense of rightness that had struck him the first time their lips met. More children came. A daughter named Elizabeth in 1892, and twin boys, Thomas and William, in 1895. The house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch continued to prosper. They weathered the economic panic of 1893, thanks largely to Zara's careful financial management and the diversity of their operations. As the new century approached, Quinton and Zara found themselves in their 40s. Surrounded by children and grandchildren, Marcus had married in 1898 and already had a baby daughter of his own. They had gray in their hair now, and the lines on their faces told the story of decades spent working under the Arizona sun. But they were happy and healthy and deeply in love. On a warm evening in June of 1900, they celebrated their 21st wedding anniversary with a party that drew friends and family from across the territory. The house and yard were filled with people, music, and laughter. And as Quinton looked around at everything they had built, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Martha Calloway, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, cornered him at one point in the evening. "You did good, Quinton Pierce," she said. "That girl needed someone to believe in her, and you stepped up. Not many men would have done the same." "I am the one who benefited," Quinton said. "Zara made me a better man and gave me a life I never could have imagined." "You made each other better," Martha said wisely. "That is what love is supposed to do." Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were finally in bed, Quinton and Zara sat together on the porch, just as they had done thousands of times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the desert air was cool and sweet with the scent of sage. 21 years, Zara mused. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and desperate. And sometimes it feels like I have always been here with you. "I remember that day so clearly," Quinton said. "I remember thinking you looked like you were preparing for battle. You were so determined, so brave, even though I could see how scared you were." "I was terrified," Zara admitted. "I had nothing left to lose, which in some ways made me reckless. But then you offered me kindness when I expected suspicion. You gave me a chance when everyone else would have turned me away. You saw past the secrets and the fear to the person I wanted to be." "I saw who you really were," Quinton corrected, "and I fell in love with that person. The strong, intelligent, compassionate woman who refused to let her past define her future." "We all have yesterday," Zara quoted, as she had done so many times over the years. "Let's build tomorrow." "We did build it," Quinton said, gesturing to encompass the ranch, the house, everything they had created. "And it is magnificent." "It is," Zara agreed. "But you know what the best part is? We are still building. Every day we add something new. Every day we choose each other again." "That is the real miracle, Quinton. Not that we found each other, but that we keep finding each other, over and over again." Quinton pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the sounds of the desert night. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, dreaming their own dreams of the future. On the ranch, cattle lowed softly, and horses moved restlessly in the corrals. This was home, built on love and trust and the willingness to let go of yesterday in order to embrace tomorrow. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Children grew up and moved away, though most stayed close to the ranch that had been their childhood home. Grandchildren multiplied, filling the house with laughter and noise during holidays and celebrations. The ranch adapted and evolved with the changing times, incorporating new technologies and methods while maintaining the core values that Quinton and Zara had established. They grew old together, their bodies marked by the passage of time but their love remaining as strong as ever. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1929, surrounded by 4 generations of family. And when Quinton looked at his wife, her hair now silver, her face lined with age, but her river-stone eyes still as clear and beautiful as they had been that first day, he felt the same surge of love and wonder that had struck him when she stepped off that stagecoach more than half a century earlier. "I would do it all again," he told her that night as they prepared for bed. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you 1,000 times over." "And I would choose you," Zara said, taking his hand. "You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me love and family and a place to belong. You gave me tomorrow." "We gave it to each other," Quinton said, as he always did. They lived many more good years together, long enough to see the ranch pass to the next generation, long enough to hold great-great-grandchildren, long enough to know that the life they had built would endure long after they were gone. When Quinton Pierce passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1934, at the age of 82, he was surrounded by the family he and Zara had created together. And when Zara followed him 2 years later, the entire community of Wilcox mourned the loss of a woman who had been a teacher, a benefactor, and a friend to so many. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, and on their shared headstone were carved the words that had defined their life together. "We all have yesterday. Let's build tomorrow." And the tomorrow they built lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore the Pierce name, in the school that Zara had helped establish, and in the countless lives they had touched with their kindness and generosity. They had taken their separate yesterdays full of pain and loss and regret, and transformed them into a tomorrow filled with love, hope, and possibility. It was a legacy worth leaving, a story worth telling, and a love worth remembering. The ranch continued to operate for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story that began on a hot August day in 1878, when a woman with secrets and a lonely rancher chose to believe that the past did not have to define the future. They had built something lasting, something beautiful, something that proved that second chances were not just possible but precious, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Marcus Pierce eventually passed the ranch to his own son, who passed it to his, and the cycle continued. The original adobe house was preserved and expanded, becoming almost a museum of family history. The cabin where Zara had first lived was maintained as well, a reminder of humble beginnings and the courage it took to start over. Every generation of Pierces heard the story of their great-great-grandparents, of the woman who arrived with a secret past and the rancher who said, "We all have yesterday. Let's build tomorrow." It became a family motto, a guiding principle that shaped how they approached challenges and opportunities. The documents that Zara had brought from St. Louis were eventually donated to a historical society, where they became part of the historical record of corruption and reform in the late 19th century. Scholars wrote papers about the case, and Zara's role in exposing the scandal was recognized as an act of courage that had helped pave the way for greater government accountability. But for those who knew the real story, the importance of those documents was not in their historical significance, but in what they represented. A woman's refusal to be silenced, her determination to do what was right even when it cost her everything, and the love of a good man who stood beside her when she needed it most. The town of Wilcox grew and changed over the decades, but the Pierce Ranch remained a constant, a landmark that locals pointed out to visitors with pride. That is where Quinton and Zara Pierce built their life together, they would say. She came here running from trouble, and he gave her a chance. They built one of the best ranches in Arizona, raised 6 children, and were married for more than 50 years. It is a real love story, the kind they should write books about. And perhaps someone did write books about it. Or perhaps the story was simply passed down through generations, embellished and refined with each telling until it became the stuff of legend. But the core of it remained true. A woman with a secret past, a lonely rancher, and the decision they made together to let go of yesterday and build tomorrow, in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the struggles they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the choice they made every single day to love each other, to trust each other, to build something beautiful together out of the broken pieces of their separate pasts. They had taken 2 damaged, incomplete lives and woven them together into something whole and strong and good. They had created a family, built a business, served their community, and loved each other with a depth and constancy that inspired everyone who knew them. That was the real legacy of Quinton and Zara Pierce. Not the land or the money or the historical footnotes, but the proof that it was possible to start over, to heal from past wounds, to find love even when you had given up hope. They showed that yesterday did not have to define tomorrow, that second chances were real, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. A woman stepping off a stagecoach on a hot day in August. A rancher offering help to a stranger. A simple conversation that led to trust, which led to respect, which led to love, which led to a lifetime of building something beautiful together. We all have yesterday, they had said. Let's build tomorrow. And tomorrow, when it came, was more wonderful than either of them could have imagined.